Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, everybody. Welcome back to the great introduction to Abu Mashar with the Kitab al-Madkhal al-Kabir. Today we are going to be continuing with the second part of Book 7 and of Unit 7 in our class. And as I was just explaining before our recording, today we are going to be focusing on the 21 assemblages of the planets and the indications of the planets. Last week we did the first half of this unit, which was I think chapters 1 through 5, which is the conditions of the planets. We added in some other supplementary material from Abu Sa'id Shadan, from Al-Kindi, and I think there was, from Al-Biruni as well, too. There might have been something from Al-Biruni there. I don't entirely remember. But we gave some indications on the conditions of the planets, but also in conjunctions. And today we're going to go over their assemblages. And we left off last class with conjunctions because it really is a bridge into understanding the assemblages today. And next class that we have, so next week, is going to be our final lecturing class. We are almost done. We have 2 weeks left until, our class is over. At this point, we have run through the full introduction of astrology and really walked through a lot of the major components of astrological interpretation that you're going to use across all branches of astrology. I kind of keep repeating this throughout the class, that the purpose of this course is to equip you not just with nativities, but so that way you can do every branch of astrology, and that way you will know all the indications. And a lot of these things, especially today, are going to be applied in many of the branches of astrology that you're going to look at, whether it be interrogations, whether it be elections, whether it be nativities, whether it be world astrology. You're going to see a lot of these different things be used, and inshallah, as if you go on to study more of those branches with me. But tomorrow or next week, we're going to be going on to Unit 8, which is the lots in their interpretation. And so after looking at the indications of the planets and the meanings of their assemblages, then we're going to talk about the lots and how the lots will factor in and really tie in everything together about what the type of delineation that we've been forming over the course of these 7 weeks. No, I would say 8 weeks. We're 8 weeks in at this point. Yeah. So let's continue. Our objective today is students will be able to identify the various assemblages of the planets, to examine their strength, their weakness, and know their individual significations. And our essential question is, how do the assemblages allow us to identify the outcome of planetary connections in the horoscope? I want us to really think about this because sometimes when, I don't want to say not always, but we can think of planetary assemblages. Typically what will come to mind in the modern context of astrology is aspect patterns. And so they're not exactly aspect patterns, but they're a bunch of different ways that the planets can connect with each other and the types of connections that are involved. They're not necessarily always through aspects, but they're through different assemblages here. And so these assemblages will allow us to understand the relationship between planets, and that relationship will then produce an effect in the waking world here, based on what those planets indicate and what they signify and what they govern. And so we're going to really unpack on how to actually read chart dynamics today, how to look at a chart and how to understand the dynamic between the planets and what they're doing and what type of effect that will produce. So we got 21 conditions of the planets. Let's get into it. First are aspects. The aspect is understood, according to Abu Mashar, of a planet. The aspect of a planet is to 7 signs at a same time. So what we mean by this is that an aspect generally is not just understood between planets. For example, if 2 planets are trine each other, 2 planets are square each other, we typically understand aspects in that way. But for the medieval astrologer, even for the Hellenistic astrologers, they understand aspects as being something that is always happening with the planet, and that the planet is simultaneously casting 7 rays into a direction at a single time, even if there are no planets there. And that's why it's very important to understand this, because, for example, you might not have something in a house, for example. Like, it might be an empty house, and there might not be anything occupying it. But there might be a planet casting a ray there. And so you want to interpret that, because a planet casting a trine into a specific house is going to be very different than a planet casting a square, or a planet casting an opposition, or a planet casting a sextile there. So you want to interpret that, and you also want to interpret, yeah, like what is the planet looking at? What can it observe? And every planet will always be able to see the third sign from it, which is the sextile, and the 11th sign from it. It'll always be able to see the 4th sign from it and the 10th sign from it, which is the square. It'll always be able to see the 5th sign from it and the 9th sign, which corresponds to the trine, and always the 7th sign, which is the opposition there. But you should also note that if the planets do not aspect any signs as well, too, that is also a part of an interpretation. And a lot of the modern understandings of astrology will call this the quincunx or the inconjunct here. But we've kind of established that they're not used as an aspect in medieval astrology because they're not divisible by 360 and by 12 at the same time. And so that's the reason why they don't get used as an aspect. But the fact that these signs, for example, if we look from Cancer here in the chart, Cancer doesn't witness Leo, it doesn't witness Gemini, which are the 2 signs that are adjacent to it, and it also doesn't witness Sagittarius or Aquarius here. And so someone might say that those are inconjunct, but we should understand that these are averse, or that these planets are in aversion here. And aversion just quite literally means that they don't see each other here. There's a lack of an aspect, and that should be interpreted there. That there is no connection, there is no sight there. That there's difficulty in sometimes this can represent difficulty in having agency over the matters. That there's difficulty in difficulty having agency over the matters, having the affairs over things, or ability to accurately understand what's going on. Or sometimes, even for things related to the soul, it relates to doubt in the mind, or it relates to uncertainty in one's actions, something of that in nature. Yes, all this is really prominent in Vedic astrology too, and is known as Sai Drishti. Its absence is definitely one of the biggest things I struggle with in modern astrology. Yeah. It really is important because, for example, if the rulers of a Fardar, they don't witness each other and they don't see each other, that has an interpretation, you know what I mean? It means that the Fardar is going to be more difficult, whereas I've seen, people have their Fardar rulers themselves, if they are trying each other, like if they're in a really good aspect or agreement, like that period in that person's life will be very fortunate. So, yeah, the aspects are very important, but the planets are always sending rays into that direction 7 times at a time. But the planets also send their rays to other planets, to the lots, and to other points as well, too. So like the nodes or things like that. The planets will always send their rays there. But remember, like the nodes, the lots, the ascendant, the midheaven, these points, they do not send rays back because they are not planets. So it's only the 7 planets who are able to send these rays in this regard. And that we're told that the most powerful aspect generally is when it happens by exact degrees. When planets are exactly 60 degrees for a sextile, when they're exactly 90 degrees, when they're exactly 120 or exactly 180, you will feel the maximum intensity of the nature of that aspect if they are that exact degree. But when they are distant from those degrees, they are weaker. And it's also very important here as well, too, that we are emphasizing that this is a sign-based relationship first and foremost. That Abu Mashar says explicitly the aspect is of a planet to 7 signs at a time. And so when you're understanding what an aspect is and how to judge an aspect, you should always be looking at the whole sign first. Even if the degrees are not there, you should still look at that they're a whole sign relationship. So if the moon is at 28 Taurus, for example, and Mercury is at 1 degrees of Virgo, they're very far apart in the sense from being in a trine. They're closer to being in a square than they are to being in a trine. Because the moon is at the end of Taurus and Mercury is at the beginning of Virgo, so they're almost about to square. But they are in a trine relationship because they are in a whole sign trine ultimately. So you need to interpret that first. Always interpret the whole sign aspect, and then you interpret the degree relationship. So if that relationship of strength and of being supportive and of agreement, if that is a very weak aspect or very wide orb, you would say that nature of that aspect is very weak. It's a weak agreement. It's a weak support. It's a weak friendship because the conditions are either about to change or, they're just too far apart. But you always start with the whole sign and then you go to degrees. And that's how you'll narrow down how to interpret the aspect there. And then when we understand the aspects, we use two terms that are used for that. The first one is application and the second is separation. So when judging an aspect, the definition of an application is that it is always going to be a lighter planet moving towards a planet slower than it. and it happens in 8 ways. So again, notice the 8 ways here is that we have 1 conjunction and then the 7 rays and aspects. So an application can happen from any of these 7 directions, from the 2 sextiles, the 2 trines, the 2 squares, and the 1 opposition there. If an application happens through a conjunction, it happens when both planets are direct in motion, and the mixture of their natures, of their tabi'ah, so hot, cold, wet, and dry, the mixture of those starts when there are 15 degrees between them. So when there's 15 degrees and they're closing in on each other, that mixture of their natures is going to start to happen more. And the closer that they are, the more powerful that mixture is going to be. And when they are the same degree and the same minute, so this is important here, that they must be the same degree, they must be the same minute, their application would then be considered complete. So if you have a planet, for example, at 10 degrees and 53 minutes of Leo, that's where one planet is. Let's say it's the sun, and Mercury is coming to 10 degrees and 53 minutes. Until Mercury gets to 10 degrees and 54 minutes, if it doesn't hit that 54-minute mark, like even 1 minute past, it's not a complete application. It must be completely past the planet by at least a minute, like an arc second, an arc minute, just something. But that's something I really want to stress here, is that sometimes you're going to see an application look like it's going to happen, but there might be something where it happens where the planet stations retrograde and it starts moving backwards. And so what was building and what was applying never actually continues. And so that's why I emphasize this part of this definition, is you need to make sure that they are both the same minute, the same degree, the same arc second, and that one passes the other. That's very important here. And Abu Mashar also says that this is when they are in the same sign. So an application can only happen in the same sign by a conjunction. So the only way an application would be able to happen if they are an out of sign conjunction is if one of the planets changes signs. Otherwise, there is no application there. And Abu Mashar says when they are in 2 different signs, even if they are only a few degrees, even if they are only a few degrees, they are not conjoined, but they are mixing in their natures, in their tabi'ah, but it is a weak mixing. And when there are multiple planets, it applies to the nearest planet first. So the closest planet first, it goes to that, and when it passes to it by 1 minute, and when it passes it by 1 minute, it then separates from it. So that's also what we're trying to say here as well too. And if it separates from one planet and does not apply to another planet, they are in each other's nature as long as they are in the signs they are conjoined. So if a planet conjoins one planet and then it doesn't conjoin anything else, as long as it's in that sign, it's still in that nature of that planet it conjoined. And the strongest is when those planets are in their same term and their distance is less than half of their orb. We talked about that last week, the moiety, or the less than half of the orb condition there. But also we're given another condition here where Abu Mashar says that you'll notice the strongest effect of their influence when both of those planets are in the same term. So you should be looking at that as well too. It's one of the other ways to assess the term, is using it to assess the strength and the condition of those planets and their influence with each other as well. And then we have separation here, is when a lighter planet is moving away from the slower planet. And when the planet, and this happens, the separation can happen in a few different manners. The first is when the planet leaves the term of their conjunction. So the mixing between them becomes weaker. And then their separation is more than half of their orb, so more of their moiety is separated by them. And their mixing of their natures becomes weaker. And if another planet meets it at its separation from it before it leaves the term they conjoined, or before it separates from the first planet by half the orb, the separating planet is in the nature of both of those planets. So if it goes from one planet and before it leaves the term it goes to another, it's in the nature of both of them. And when it separates from the second planet by body, its condition is like its condition with the first planet from which it separated from. And then planets who are near the same degrees will share in each other's nature until they separated by more than half of their orb. It's generally how we should understand the conjunctions here. And then we have aspect by longitude. This is something that everyone should be familiar with here. We've used this extensively throughout the class. This literally just means the zodiacal degree here in which the aspect is happening. So when planets are in signs that aspect each other, such as the sextile, the trine, the square, the opposition, they are an aspect by longitude here. So like Cancer and Aries are in a square relationship. Gemini and Aries are in a sextile relationship. And in an aspect by longitude, the faster planet is applying to a slower planet, and that's always important here. And we've established the faster planets and the slower planets because we've used the Chaldean order of the planets, which is Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. And so remember, the moon can apply to all of the planets. The moon can make applications to Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. But Saturn cannot make any applications to any of the other planets because Saturn is the slowest one. So everything is going to Saturn and the moon is going to everything. So it's something to think about there. Saturn cannot aspect Jupiter. It cannot aspect Mars. It cannot aspect the Sun. It cannot aspect Venus. It cannot aspect Mercury. It cannot aspect the moon. But the moon can aspect Saturn because the moon can go to Saturn. So this is important. The faster planet always applies to the slower planet until they arrive at the same degree in minute, and then they pass that, and then they begin to separate. And then the power begins in an aspect by longitude when they are 12 degrees between them. And if two planets are in the same degree, we're told a specific consideration here. We're told to consider the application to the planet who has the most dignities in the sign that is giving the application. So in this instance, we would want to see the moon here because the moon is giving the application over to Mercury and over to Mars, who are in the same degree in the sign of Aries here. They're in 23 degrees. And then the application to the other planet is considered. So we would prioritize the application in this case of the moon to Mercury here because the moon is in the domicile of Mercury. And so that is the most important here for the moon because the moon Mercury has the most dignity over these degrees of Gemini here. And yes, as I was concerned. And then when two planets are in the same degree and apply to a planet, the planet having more dignity in the sign of the planet receiving their application is considered. So if two planets are in the same degree and they are applying to a planet, so this is two applying planets, they go to one planet. This is if like Venus and Mars are going to Jupiter, for example, because Venus and Mars are both slower, but Jupiter are faster, but Jupiter is the slower one. And then if that would happen, if that both of those planets were in that same degree, the planet receiving the application would be considered there. So in that case, it would be Jupiter out of Mars and Venus because Jupiter is receiving their application. And then the Lord of the Term will precede all other planets having dignity if they are equal. So we're told here that the Lord of the Term is a tiebreaker, basically. That if there's equal dignity between the planets and their rulership, and you don't know which planet has the most dominance in this connection or is the most important one in this connection, you would then look at the Lord of the Term to see who is the arbitrator here between them. And if the assembly extends into the next sign, it will continue to be in the influence under more than half of their orb is separated. However, if the fast planet is not considered applying to the slow planet until it transfers into the next sign. So that's always important that we're told here is that applications don't happen across sign barriers. So once it comes to the end of the sign, or it leaves a sign, that application is no longer happening anymore. Application is done. But once the faster planet then shifts signs, then a new application has been built. So that's very important to mention here that, applications don't happen across the sign boundaries because they understand it as fundamental shifting conditions completely. Let's see. Yes. And then in all cases, if it passes by the planet by 1 minute or more, it is separating, but they remained mixed in nature, which we have established. But then we also have aspect by latitude here as well too. So we have longitude, which is in the zodiac, but then we also have latitude, which is by declination. An application of planets by latitude happens in three ways. The first is that they are conjunct in the same latitude and in the same direction. And so that one of them will eclipse the other. And so this is like what we see during solar and lunar eclipses. That the sun and moon are conjoined, but they are also at the same latitude. And so one of them passes over the other. And the second consideration is a conjunction in opposing directions. And so one of them is ascending and the other is descending, but their latitudes, but their degrees of latitudes are the same. So this is like if two planets are coming together, one's going north and one's coming south, and they come together and then they pass each other again. And then there's the application of planets by latitude through the two sextiles, two trines, and two squares. One of the planets ascends north and the other one south, and the other one south or the other one north. So this is important that we're given three different types of conditions here of applications by latitude. Planets conjunct in the same direction, planets conjunct in opposing directions, or planets who are sextile, trine, or square with opposing latitudes, north or south, south or north. And so we're told to examine the following in these types of applications. That we must examine in the applications by latitude, the one with the fewer latitudes, what degree of latitude it reaches of the other planet with more than the heavier or the lighter planet has. So application in latitude will be when that planet with fewer latitude, it reaches that other planet with that degree of latitude. And the separation is when the aspect completes and it moves away. And another type of application happens when the degrees of northern planets are added to its position and the degrees of the southern planets are subtracted in its direction. And then one sees how many degrees there are. And so if there's less than 60, 90, 120, or 180, then the light planet will apply to the heavy planet. And so you can see that they're also, again, looking at aspects by latitude here. And when they are the exact numbers, it brings the completion of this. So we have some examples here of this. Our first example here, and these come from the great introduction by Abu Mashar from Ben Dykes' translation. He gives some really great graphics that are helpful and useful for understanding this. And so here that we see that the moon and Saturn are at 2 degrees north in Gemini here. So this is our first consideration here, that they're both conjoined in the same latitude here. They're both up in that northern latitude and in the same sign, and they're conjoined. In our second consideration here, there's a connection by opposing latitudes. So one of them is ascending and the other is descending, but their degrees of latitudes are the same. So for example, we have the moon who is in 2 Gemini, or 2 north in Gemini, and Saturn who is 2 north in Sag. But the thing is that Saturn might be, is descending and going further south of the ecliptic, whereas the moon is going further north of the ecliptic. So they're at the same latitude at 2 north, but they're moving in opposing directions and they're opposed in the zodiac here. And then there's this third connection here, which is the 2 sextiles and trines, and one of the planets is ascending north and the other south, and one south and the other north. So we see that Saturn, for example, is at 2 degrees south in the sign of Aquarius, whereas the moon is at 2 degrees north in the sign of Taurus. They are in a square relationship and their latitudes are opposing. They're both 2 degrees, but one is north and one is south here. So these are also aspects that you should be paying attention to in addition to the regular aspects that you see by latitude. Because Abu Mashar tells us that sometimes a planet applies to a planet in longitude zodiacally, but another in latitude. And Abu Mashar gives us an example from Dorotheus, and the word that's used here that's translated is white slave here, but it's not actually what the Arabic says. The Arabic says mamluk here, which refers to typically non-Arab slaves who were mostly Turkic, Caucasian, they were Mongols, they may have been Eastern and Southeastern European, and they were typically slave soldier militias that would be hired and also enslaved through war at the time. So again, white slave doesn't really translate that effectively, in my opinion. So I've done that for this reason. Again, I don't think this is the best example, but it's also an example that Abu Mashar is preserving, actually, that comes from Dorotheus here. And he says that if a slave escapes when the moon applies to Mars in longitude and to Jupiter in latitude, or to Jupiter in longitude and Mars in latitude, because of its application to Mars in one of 2 ways, it indicates that they will be found. And because of its application to Jupiter, it indicates that his master will be reconciled with him and escape from punishment here. And so you can see some of the indications of Jupiter through reconciliation here and the fortune of reconciliation. But Mars as subjugation, as, being caught, being enslaved, domination, things of that nature that are all malefic in nature here. And we're told that the most firm connection is with the planet who is the lord of its term, its house, its exaltation, its triplicity, or its decan, if there's multiple connections by longitude and latitude. So if you're looking at longitude and latitude, you see there's multiple connections. Look at the planet who is ruling that term. And let's say if it's ruling its term, it is connecting in latitude, you'd say that that planet has the strongest connection with that planet there because there is more reception there. There's more rulership connection there between those planets. And then the strongest indication comes when the same planet aspects on longitude and on latitude. So that same planet is making a zodiacal aspect and a latitude aspect at the same time. Then we move on to connection by Antisha, which we have explored a lot in this class already, but we're going to review it yet again. And remember, Antisha is a type of sympathy. It's a type of support. It's a type of help between the planets. The connection by contra Antisha, at least here, is when planets are agreeing in their rising time and their ascension. So the signs, for example, Pisces and Aries, they will have the same same rate of ascension. Aquarius and Taurus have the same rate of ascension. Gemini and Capricorn have the same rate of ascension. And so this is said to be a natural application by sextile. And so that these are signs that have some agreement and that they have some friendship because they are reflecting across the equinox here. Whereas the connections by Antisha, which reflect across the solstice, are analogous to be a natural application by opposition, because these are by the length. Their aspects are through the length of daylight here and through extremes that happen, because the solstices are related to extremes, whereas the equinoxes are related more to balance and more to fortune there. Our fourth consideration that we have here is solitary motion. And so solitary motion is what astrologers understand as the void. And there's many different definitions for the void, of course. But this is the one that Abu Mashar gives in the Kitab al-Madkhal here. So when a planet is in solitary motion, we are told that is when it separates from a planet by conjunction or aspect and does not apply to another planet as long as it is in that sign. So we're given a very specific consideration here, is that the planet must separate from a planet by conjunction or an aspect, and as long as it gets to the end of that sign, it doesn't aspect another planet, it'll be void. Even if there's a planet on the other part of the sign barrier is what's acting as preventing an application or separation here in this case. And so as long as it gets to that sign barrier, it's void there. And this is what's known as the void, of course, again, but it applies to all planets. It doesn't just apply to the moon. So if you see Venus, for example, coming to the end of the sign and she hasn't aspected any planets, she's technically void there. And explicitly, it said that this is a sign-based configuration, and it must not be applying to another planet as long as it is in that sign. So again, the sign-based connections, I really like to emphasize that in medieval astrology, because sign-based connections and whole sign things tend to be a big controversy amongst traditional astrologers in the contemporary world. But it is very explicitly stated here in the medieval sources. And then to take that further, we have a condition known as wilderness. And this is it's known as a wild planet who is in a sign with no aspects at all. And this most frequently happens to the moon, but it can happen with other planets. Like in this instance, you can see that Mercury is actually wild here. So Mercury is in the sign of Sagittarius. And the 7 rays that it casts directions into are the 2 sextiles, which would be Aquarius and Libra. It would also be square in Pisces and Virgo. It would trine in Aries and Leo. And it would oppose in Gemini. And so it doesn't see anything there, because it doesn't see anything in Taurus, it doesn't see anything in Scorpio or in Capricorn here. So we would say Mercury is wild. And so we're told that if a planet is wild, to understand the progression and the development of what will happen in the future, is you would then assign the lord of the terms to it, and the planet would said to be applying to that planet, or applying to have the conditions and the situations of that planet as long as it's in that term. So if Mercury is in the term of Venus, this is as if Mercury is mixing with Venus. Or if the moon is wild and she's in the term of Venus, this is as if the moon was applying to Venus. And so the moon will take on more Venusian indications and significations related to love, sensuality, art, beauty, joy, things like that. So wilderness is something, and usually wilderness is understood as literally a planet being alone, being in solitary and being isolated and literally being in the wilderness, pretty much. That's why I think it's a really great term to describe this as. Oh, wait, let's see. There we go. Next, we have transfer of light. And transfer of light is when a light planet separates from a slow planet and it applies to another planet. And then it transfers the nature of that planet to a third planet. So in this case, we see that we have a light planet separates from a slow planet. So a light planet, which is the moon, separates from a slow planet, which is Jupiter. So they're in a sextile here. And then that light planet then applies to another planet. So the moon will then be applying to sextile Mercury. And Mercury is technically not making an aspect, it is in a trine relationship with Jupiter, but the aspect is separating here because Jupiter's at 10 Pisces and Mercury is at 20 Cancer. But because the moon is separating from Jupiter and going to Mercury, it is transferring the nature of what Jupiter has and bringing it over to Mercury. So whereas this trine is something that would have been separating and fizzling and dissipating, the moon acts as an intermediary to bring this situation together. So that's how that should be interpreted here. And so this is one dynamic in which you can see this. And there's also another way you can see transfer of light. And this happens by conjunction here. And it's when a light planet applies to a slower planet, and then the slow planet applies to another planet. And the slow planet transfers some of the nature of the light planet to which it applies to. So we can see that a light planet applies to a slower planet. So a light planet here, it applies to a slow planet, which is Mars. And then the slow planet applies to another planet. So Mars is technically applying to Jupiter here. And so the slow planet transfers some of the nature of the light planet to which it applies to. So Mars is transferring the nature of Venus over to Jupiter here. This says Saturn here, so ignore this here. This is incorrect here. Listen to what I'm saying. Mars is transferring the nature of Venus over to Jupiter here because it is in the middle and is the intermediary. And because Venus is going to Mars and Mars is going to Jupiter, as Venus goes to Mars, Mars will be bringing whatever Venus brought to it to Jupiter. And then we have collection of light. So those are transfers of light. This is the transfer between connections of planets. But then we have collection. And that's when two or more planets apply to one single planet, and it collects and it receives their natures. And so the example that we have here is the moon in Taurus is separating from a sextile to Mercury and applying to Jupiter. And Jupiter, as the slow planet in further degrees of the zodiac, it aspects both Mercury through a sextile and the moon through a trine, and it collects their light and merges their connections together, even if they're separating, but also takes on their natures. So do we see that here, that the Mercury is going towards Jupiter, the moon is going towards Jupiter, but the moon is technically moving away from Mercury because the moon's 13 and Mercury is 10. Jupiter is collecting both of their natures, but also merging their situation together through collecting it. This could be like two people are telling someone something, for example, in like an interrogation or something like that. Like you see two people bringing something to someone. There's also a reflection of light, which happens in two ways. The first way is that planets who are the indicators in a horoscope do not apply or aspect each other, but they aspect or apply to a planet, and that planet aspects a place on the sphere. Then it reflects the light of both of them onto that place it aspects. And so this one's a little bit of an interesting one. Technically, Jupiter is also collecting light here. So two planets who are the indicators in the horoscope, they do not apply to each other here. They do not aspect to each other, but they both aspect a shared planet. So you see that the moon and Venus both aspect Jupiter here. They both aspect that place, and that planet aspects a place on the sphere. So if the question was about money in this case, if the person would obtain money, right? If the person would obtain fortune, or if they would obtain something in that career, well, we would see that as it matters in money, Jupiter, it reflects the light that it's gathering. It reflects it and takes it and pushes it onto this part of the sphere. But not just that part of the sphere. Remember, Jupiter is sending rays in 7 directions. So Jupiter is technically sending that light into all of these directions here, reflecting all of that onto those parts of the sphere there. And so if that happens, that reflection of light can mean that the person obtains what they're seeking. Even if the ruler at their indicator, like for example, the indicator of the ascendant here is Venus. And if the person is seeking, something related to, career or whatever, they might not aspect each other, but they aspect Jupiter here. And so Jupiter is going to take the light and it's going to reflect it onto the second house here, which will then increase the sustenance, the wealth, the financial situation of the person here. So this is one type of reflection, but there's another type of reflection too. And again, when the Lord of the Ascendant and of the matter do not aspect or are separating, if a planet moves between them, it reflects light of one of the two onto the other, which is a type of transfer here. So if we have the Lord of the Ascendant and the Lord of the matter, they do not aspect each other. So the Lord of the Ascendant is Mercury, and let's say the Lord of the matter is Jupiter here, right? They don't aspect in Aquarius and Capricorn. But the moon is moving from a square to Jupiter, and it's going to make a sextile to Mercury. So even though they don't see each other here, it takes the light, Jupiter's light is shine onto the moon, and then it's reflected offwards onto Mercury through the moon here as an intermediary. This is like two people who can't see each other or who are not physically present with each other, and someone is connecting or uniting them, or again, a third party or something like that comes in, brings people together who otherwise would have not been brought together. We also have prohibition, which happens in 2 ways, and the first one is by conjunction. And it's when there are 3 planets in one sign in various degrees, and the heavy planet has the most degrees, so it's the furthest through the sign, and then the middle planet prevents the one with the fewest degrees from application with the heavy planet until it passes it. So this means that, for example, Venus and Saturn, Saturn is the heaviest planet, and Venus is the next heaviest planet after Saturn, or it's the lightest planet after Saturn, I guess. And technically that conjunction is forming. But Mercury is at 15 Aries. And so because Mercury has gotten in between Venus and Saturn, Mercury is preventing Venus from going to Saturn and is blocking Venus from going to Saturn until Mercury passes Saturn. Because remember, Mercury is the faster one in this case. So this is Mercury literally interfering or prohibiting in this case. Because whatever connection that was initially happening between Venus and Saturn as the slower planets, Mercury as a faster planet broke their connection past Venus, is now blocking Venus from going to Saturn, and then Mercury, once it passes Saturn, then whatever blockage or whatever situation or circumstance it was will have then passed, and then you can say Venus is now applying to Saturn again. But once that blockage happens and that interference happens, yeah, it's over. Yeah, the application is no longer happening there. It's blocked. It's prohibited. And you would do that in interpretation. Someone is literally blocking you. Someone is literally interfering. Someone is cutting you off in this case. It's also, I think, cutting off of light is part of this indication too. And then the second one is through aspect here. So prohibition through aspect is when 2 planets are in one sign and the light one is applying to the heavy one. So this is 2 planets, Mars and Saturn. Mars is applying to Saturn. And another planet is applying to the heavy one in aspect. And then the one which is with it in the sign prevents the aspect and destroys its application when their degrees are the same. So because Mars is also applying to Saturn, because they are in the same sign here, the moon is blocked from connecting with Saturn here because of Mars's connection. And so Mars would be, prohibiting this connection with Saturn here, with the moon. And when the degrees of that which aspects are closer to the application than the degrees of the encountering planet, there is application for the aspecting planet because it applies to it before the encountering planet. And then we have giving nature, which is giving a planet tabia. And so a planet gives its nature when it applies to the lord of the sign in which it is in. So the exaltation lord, the term lord, the triplicity lord, or the decan lord. Not just the domicile lord. All of them. All of them. And it gives the nature of that planet to it. So, for example, the moon is in Aries here. The moon is hot and dry in Aries. That is its tabia here. And Mars is also hot and dry. And so because the moon is going to Mars, the moon is giving the nature of hot and dryness, which is Mars's nature, to Mars there. Does that make sense? It's giving that nature, that essence, that imprint onto it. And then there's also giving power, which is giving kuwa. And this happens again when a planet is in its own house, exaltation, triplicity, term, or decan, and it applies to another planet. So this is, for example, the moon in Cancer applying to Jupiter in Libra. The moon has kuwa here. The moon is in its own house. It's in its own house. It's its own triplicity. And so the moon is giving its own power and its own strength over to Jupiter, which is different than its nature. This is about having strength, about having agency, about having power, about having authority. Well, not necessarily authority, but just willpower and strength. Whereas that's not necessarily associated with the tabia, which is much more about elemental essence, the nature, the imprint that the planet brings. And then there's also the giving of two natures here. So this can happen when a planet is in a sign it has dignity in, and it applies to another planet which it also has dignity in it too. So this is for example, Venus is in Pisces and it's applying to Jupiter from Pisces. So it gives natures in two ways. It gives its kuwa and its tabia. It gives its kuwa because Venus is in Pisces, so it's exalted here, and it's applying to another planet. But it gives its tabia because the nature of Jupiter is hot and wetness, and so this wetness is being brought over to Jupiter here, which is also the ruler of the sign. There's also a second way in which the planet applies to a planet from its domain, such as a diurnal planet to a diurnal planet or a nocturnal planet to a nocturnal planet. So the sun in Leo applies to Jupiter as a part of the diurnal sect here, and they are in diurnal signs. There's also giving management too. And a planet applies to a planet from whichever direction, and it gives its own management to it. And if it's a sextile or trine and there is reception, it is giving from agreement. So the situations of the moon in Gemini here, for example, are being brought over to Mars in Virgo. And if it's from a conjunction, when there is mixing between them, there is agreement too. And if it is the opposite of what we mentioned, it gives management without agreement, which is what we see here. That there isn't any really reception between Mars or between the moon. I think, actually, no, you could probably say that there's some decan here. Maybe this is the decan of Mars here, the second decan of Gemini. So you could say maybe. But a planet, the planet giving management is the planet who gives the situation, who gives its indications, its significations, its responsibility over to another. And so whatever situation it's giving, it either does that with support and with happiness, with joy through a sextile or a trine, or it does that through difficulty, or through strain, or through conflict, or without agreement, if it's through a square or opposition. And again, if it's a conjunction, if there's mixing between their natures in the way that we've talked about how planets and their natures can mix, if there is mixing, they mix in two natures, that should ring a bell, then you would say that, for example, that there's agreement there. But then there is returning. So there's giving management, but there's also returning the management as well too. Because you can give something to someone, but they can say, I don't want that. Or you could buy that and you can just return it. You know what I mean? Like to a store, you buy it, you decide you don't want it, you return it. So how does that happen astrologically? The first condition is that the planet applies to another planet under the rays of the sun, and so it cannot grasp hold of what it received from it, and it returns to it. And so that's a big condition and a consideration here too, is that if a planet is under the rays, it technically cannot grasp hold of that aspect because it's invisible and it's being overpowered by the sun. And so the sun rays are very important because they actually block a planet receiving management over a situation and over the conditions of things. Whereas the second one here is that if the planet applies to a planet which is retrograding, and so it returns to it what it had received from it because of its retrogradation. So it's like if a planet applied to a planet initially, and then it went retrograde and it's coming back to aspect again, it's returning. It's returning whatever it had received because of that retrogression. And returning with soundness. So if the situation is given back, the situation can be given back with good fortune and with support in 3 ways. That's if the receiver receives the giver. So there's reception between both of those planets. The second is if the direct giver, so the planet that is giving is a direct planet, and a burnt or retrograde receiver, so the receiving planet of that is either burnt or it's retrograde. If both of those planets are in a cardine or succeeded house, it returns with soundness. If the retrograde or burnt planet that is receives the planet that is cadent, and the retrograde burnt receiving planet is cadent, so that weak planet, yes, is cadent here. And the giver is in a cardine and it's succeedent here. So this is a planet who is giving management, but it's in a cardine or it's succeedent, and it's giving with strength to a planet who is weak here. And when they are like this, and a cadent or burnt or retrogressing planet receives the management, the matter is corrupted. But whenever the receiver returns to the giver and the giver is in a good position, that ameliorates the matter after corruption. So that's important here, is that when something is returned, it does corrupt the matter here. And it's like, yeah, the management, the planet receives the management, but it returns it back. And sometimes the matter can be returned in a corrupted way. But if the planet that is giving and the planet returns it back to, and that planet that it has returned it back to is in that strong position, like the cadent, the cardine direct, or not cadent cardine, sorry, succeedent cardine direct, maybe in dignity too. Then whatever difficulty that happened after giving that management in a maybe difficult way, again, yeah, it'll be ameliorated after that corruption. But there is returning with corruption here. So these are the conditions of returning with soundness. This is returning with corruption here. And if the giver is cadent, so the giver planet of who's giving management is a cadent planet who is weak, and the retrograde and burnt receiving planet is in a cardine or succeedent, when it returns to the giver what it had received from it, because of the retrograde or burnt condition, which is angular, it does not take up the matter, and the matter is corrupted after being established. And the second condition here is that the giver and the receiver are both cadent, or they are both burnt, and it returns to it what it had received from it because of the condition of its retrogression or being under the rays, and it destroys the management. The giver is not strong enough to take it up, and the matter cannot be begun or finished. So again, this is about like literally giving situation to people, giving things to people, and also returning them as well too, and the types of returning that come from them as well too. We also have reformation, which is a little simpler, and it kind of ties in with some of these other concepts. And a reformation is when the planet is applying to another planet, but before it reaches it, it retrogresses away from it, and then the application is aborted. So like we can see here, for example, that Venus is in Leo and Mars is in Leo. And this actually was a real example that happened in 2023, that Venus and Mars were going to conjoin at the end of Leo. But right when that happened, Venus slowed down and stationed retrograde. And so that caused a reformation here where Venus didn't actually go to conjoin Mars. And so whatever condition and situation that was building was aborted and abandoned completely there. Literally, Venus decided to withdraw and pull away through retrogradation. So yeah. There's also resistance, and it's when a light planet that is advanced in the sign, and then there is a heavier planet lesser in degrees, and a third planet lighter than the first aims at application to the heavy planet. And the light one with many degrees retrogresses and applies to the heavy one in its retrogression. So what do we mean here? So we see that Venus we have Venus, Mars, and Mercury in Pisces. and that Mars is at 20, Mercury is at 18, and that there's this connection that would have initially been forming between them. And then Venus, what would have happened here, and what the example that's given is Venus goes into Aries, and then she retrogrades back into Pisces, and then goes back to conjoin Mars, and interferes now in the connection between Mercury and Mars here because she passed to Mars. Does everyone see that here? Is that because Venus has just retrograded and turned around and is coming back to conjoin Mars, it's going to, it's now interfering in whatever connection Mercury and Mars had here. So that's a type of resistance here. And it's also a type of blocking here as well, too. I do have to really run to the restroom real quick, everyone. I'm so sorry to abruptly interrupt like this. So I'm going to pause this, and I'm just going to take a very quick break right here. Alrighty. So we've talked a little bit about resistance. This is a type of blocking. Yes, that's what I was talking about right before I left abruptly. But yes, it is a type of blocking. And it's typically when a planet is basically interfering in this connection that's already happening, but it seems to be through the retrogression, specifically that's mentioned in this way. So yes. Oh, let's see. Boom. All right, there we go. And then we have cutting the light as well, too. So this is a type of blocking. It's also a type of cutting the light. We have the same example here that we have. And a planet is aiming at an application to a heavier planet, and a planet is in the second sign from that of the light planet. And before the light planet reaches application to the heavy planet, the planet which is in the second sign from it retrogresses, enters its sign, and conjoins it. Thus, it cuts the light from that planet which was aiming at application to it. And so you can see that here, and that's kind of what I was trying to describe here, is that Venus was in Aries, she's in that second sign from it, and then she retrogressed and was brought back into Pisces, conjoined Mars, and then now she is cutting off the light from being able to reach, of Mercury from being able to reach Mars. And so there's a blocking, it's an interference, there's also a type of prohibition as well too. And when an application indicates completion of something and the condition in respect to the cutting is like this, it indicates a man whom he had not noticed, presents himself to the lord of the matter, and he destroys the matter and cuts him off from success in it. It's a very simple analogy here. You can literally see it's someone interfering in you obtaining the thing that you're seeking out. It doesn't have to be someone, but it can always be something as well, too. There's a second way here. And it's when a light planet applies to a heavier planet, and that the planet gives something to a heavy planet, but before the light planet reaches the degree of the heavy planet, that planet applies to the heavy planet and passes it. Then, the application of the light planet to the heavier planet and its application to the first is aborted. So this is what we see as well too here, is that hold on, let me just make sure I'm interpreting this correctly. Okay, yes. So we're talking about Venus and Mars in this case. So Venus and Mars are in Pisces, and so they are connecting with each other, and they are trying to conjoin each other, but then Mercury comes in and interferes in their connection. And so Mercury then, they're all direct here, Mercury then passes Venus, and then starts going to Mars, and then whatever connection that Venus had with Mars is now cut off, because Mercury is literally blocking or cutting off the light of Venus from being able to reach Mars here. So it indicates that a man will find in his search something which belongs to the indication of the nature of the planet, and he aims for it until, when he is about to achieve it, it escapes from him and another thing comes to him instead. So literally, because there's this connection that happens with this other planet that comes in randomly, it's like something that you're searching out for, you don't attain it, something unexpected comes in instead, and it cuts you off from actually being able to attain the thing that you wanted. And then the third one here is when a planet applies to a planet other than the lord of the matter, or a planet applies to it and transfers its light to a planet other than the lord of the matter here. So the example here is that we have, I don't think this is a specific example here, actually. A planet applies to a planet other than the lord of the matter, or a planet applies to it and transfers its light to a planet other than the lord of the matter. Okay, so yeah, so it's Mars is transferring the light from Jupiter to Saturn here, or from Saturn to Jupiter here, because Saturn and Jupiter are separating and disconnected, and so Mars is connecting them together here. Oh wait, no, it shouldn't be connecting actually. But wait. It transfers its light to a planet other than the lord of the matter. I might not be understanding that one correctly. Sorry. I'm sorry, y'all. Let's see. No, I think that should be correct there. It should be Mars. Is Mars cutting here? No. No, I don't think Mars is cutting. Oh, no, you know what it is? Saturn is cutting. I'm so sorry. No, Saturn is cutting here. That's what it should be. Is that if Mars is trying to connect with Jupiter here, and Mars can't connect with Jupiter, it's happening because Saturn is in the middle of them here and is cutting the light off from being actually able to connect with Jupiter here. That's what it's supposed to be here. I'm so sorry. I need to make that a little bit more explicit for myself here. So yes, Mars is going to Saturn first, which is blocking and interfering with Mars's connection with Jupiter here. And then we have our 19th condition, which is the favor of the planets. And when a planet is in its well or in its fall, and a planet applies to it, or applies to a planet which has friendship, or one of the lords of its triplicity, or planets having dignity in its sign, or the giver or the receiver has a witness in its own sign, then it pulls it out and brings it out from its fall or of the well. So in this case, we see that Mars is fallen. It is in the sign of Cancer, and the moon as a triplicity lord comes to trine Mars, and it pulls it or plucks it out of the well there. And then there's recompense here, is when after that situation happens, the favor of that planet towards that other planet, it does not cease until the planet which bestowed the favor then falls into its own fall or into a well, and the other planet then applies to it, or it applies to the other and withdraws it from the well or its fall. Thus, it has compensated it fully for the favor that it had bestowed on it, and it has rewarded it for that. So when when the moon scratched Mars back while Mars is in Cancer, Mars is scratching the moon's back here while the moon is fallen in Scorpio here. It's also said that sometimes the lord of exaltation of the sign of the planet is called the lord of its favor. We're given our 21st condition here, which is reception, which we kind of been alluding to a little bit. And Abu Mashar does say explicitly here that reception is if a planet applies to a planet from the house, exaltation, term, triplicity, or decan, and then it receives it. So if you have like the moon in Gemini, for example, or the moon in Aries applying to Mars in Gemini, there's reception there because the moon is in Mars' sign and it's applying to Mars. And so Mars receives the moon there because it has rulership over the moon there. Or the planet applies to a planet and the receiver of the application is in the house of the giver or in one of its other shares. So for example, this is like if Venus is in Pisces and Jupiter is in Taurus. Venus is, by Venus being in Pisces, Venus is exalted, she's in good dignity there, and she's in the sign of Jupiter. And Jupiter is in the sign of Venus. That is a type of mutual reception. They are both in each other's signs. And a reception exists by whole sign, but its reception by application is the strongest. So remember, application means that they're moving towards each other there. By aspect or by conjunction. So there's 8 ways an application can happen as we established. Reception must exist by whole sign in one of those 8 ways. And the strongest types of reception are with the lord of the domicile of that sign and the lord of the exaltation of that sign. So those are going to be your highest priorities of reception. The weaker ones are going to be the term, the triplicity, or the decan alone. If it's just that type of reception, it's a weak, middling reception. But a complete reception is that if you have reception with the lord of the term and triplicity together, or term and decan, or triplicity and decan. If both of those kind of combine together in a type of reception, that would be more complete in nature. And there's reception with agreement, which is that if there is reception between the planets and they are in each other's signs, and they are in a trine or a sextile, that there's reception with agreement there because they're in an aspect of good relationship. Or two signs in equal ascending or length of daylight, because there is also agreement in that too. If they're in signs that agree in rulership, there's reception with agreement there as well too. Then each of them receives the other because of their agreement in the nature of the signs with each other here. So there's also that types of reception too. And the rules for benefics and malefics here, that benefics receive each other because of moderateness in their natures. And Mars and Saturn only receive each other from the conjunction, from the sextile, or from the trine. And then for the three tiers of reception, there's strong reception, which occurs between the sun and the moon, because the sun receives the moon from all the signs, since the moon's light is from the sun. And the sun's reception of the moon from opposition is actually hostile here. When it has application to the sun from a sign the sun has dignity, the reception is doubled. That of the nature of the sign, that of the nature of the sign that of the nature and that of the sign, sorry. So the nature of hot and dry, but then also the sign, which is hot and dry. And also Mercury receives a planet from Virgo too. And the middling type of reception here is the planets to each other from their house, exaltation, term, triplicity, or decan. If two of these come together, or each one of the two receives the other, it is a strong reception. But anything less than those two is the lesser forms of reception. And this takes us to types of good and bad fortune here, of the planets now. So we've established that there's certain relationships, certain types of connections. We've established that there's certain types of assemblages, that we've gone through all these 21 assemblages and the ways that the planets connect with each other. And now we all rank them. We rank all of these conditions and we put them into this list that show the good fortune and the misfortune, the power and the strength and the corruption of these planets. So for good fortune of the planets and some of the misfortune, is some of the good fortune is if they are in the aspect of the benefics. So the good fortune comes from that. And if they are, the malefics are cadent from them. So if the malefics are in the cadent places from that, from whatever indicator you're looking at. So if they're in the 3rd, 6th, 9th, or 12th from that. If they are separated from a fortune and then connecting with another fortune. So going from one fortunate planet to another fortunate planet is good. If they are enclosed between the two fortunes, though, that's a condition of misfortune. So that's literally going from one bad thing to another bad thing. If it's in the heart of the sun, that is a condition of good fortune, because this is specifically, like Abu Mashar will say that this is good fortune. If the aspect of the sun from the trine or the sextiles, we've established before that these are where the sun is supportive. And the aspect of the moon, while the moon is a fortune, and so assuming that the moon has not changed to the nature of the malefics, her aspect is fortunate. If the planets are swift in motion, if they are increasing in their light and in their number, and if they are in their halb, so if they're in their own houses, their exaltation, their term, their triplicity, their face, or their joy. If they are in bright degrees, if they are in the degrees of nur, if they are in their domain, so if a masculine planet is in a masculine sign, if it's in masculine degrees, and if it's in the hemisphere, and the same if it's for feminine as well too. And if the luminaries were in the shares of the two fortunes, and if the two fortunes were in the shares of the luminaries. So if the luminaries were in the signs of Taurus, Libra, Sagittarius, or Pisces, so the moon or the sun, or if Venus and Jupiter were in the sign of Cancer and Leo. We're also told that that's a condition of good fortune too. And then we're told good fortune is of three kinds. There's double good fortune when two or more of these dignities happen to a planet. So for example, Mercury in Virgo has both the house and the exaltation there. So two types of dignities. If it has its own term, it's three types of dignities there. Three types of good fortune there. If the ascendant is Virgo and Mercury is in the ascendant, it indicates four types of good fortune because then it has its joy. And so you can see how you can kind of stack these testimonies in many ways. Like, for example, Saturn in the sign of Aquarius, because it has dignity there. It also has triplicity. It also has term. So there's three types of dignities there. Then it has its rejoicing in the 12th house. So that would be another types of quadruple good fortune. So you could understand that for the planet when their dignities stack in that way. The second condition of good fortune here, just good fortune alone, is when planets are in its own house, which its nature is moderated and it agrees with it, which is known as its preferred domicile. So Saturn's preferred domicile, because Saturn is cold and dry, is in hot and wet Aquarius, which tempers and balances it. Jupiter is hot primarily, and so its preferred domicile is in hot Sag. Mars is hot and dry, and so it is tempered in cold and wet Scorpio. The Sun only has Leo. Venus prefers the nocturnal sign of Taurus to the diurnal Libra. And Taurus is also Springer, a spring, hot and wet. Mercury is dry, and so is Virgo, which is cold and dry, transition into autumn. And Cancer has the moon. And then the other domiciles of these planets are known to be the unpreferred domiciles, and so they bring less good fortune. So Saturn in Aquarius brings more good fortune than Saturn in Capricorn here, because Saturn in Aquarius is more tempered in this sign. Whereas Saturn in Capricorn still has dignity and it'll still bring fortune, but it will not bring it in the moderated way that it'll bring with Saturn in Aquarius, if that makes sense. And same for Jupiter in Pisces, or Mars in Aries, or Venus in Libra, or Mercury in Gemini, because all of these are still the domiciles of the planets, but they don't align with the planet's nature, or they exacerbate it to some degree. Like, for example, cold and dry Saturn is in cold and dry Capricorn, so you have excess cold and dryness in that sign, or hot and dry Mars is in hot and dry Aries, so you will have more excessive hot and dryness there. And then the strength of the planets, the quwa of the planets again, their power is when they are rising north and they are northern and their ecliptical latitude and in their apogee. And their apogee, sorry. So when planets are rising northern, they are ascending, they are getting higher, they are elevating in prominence and visibility sometimes as well too. Also when they're rising in the circle of their apogee again, so after the retrograde, then going to the conjunction. The second station, when the planet station direct, is also indicates power and strength as well too, as we've talked about. When planets leave the rays of the sun, so when planets are emerging as morning stars, or if Mercury and Venus emerge in the west as an evening star, that is also fortunate too, but primarily for Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn if they emerge as morning stars. If they are in a cardine, so if they are in the 1st, 10th, 7th, or 4th in that order. And if they are in the succedent houses, if they are in the 11th, 5th, 2nd, 8th in that order. And if the superior planets are sextile to the sun, so from the moment they leave the rays of the sun to when they are actually sextile to the sun exactly, that is said to be fortunate because they are eastern there and they are strong in their easternness, as we've established. And if they are in the two masculine quadrants, from the ascendant to the midheaven and from the descendant to the IC. And if the sun is in these quadrants in the masculine sign, then it is powerful unless it is in Libra. And for the inferior planets is that when they are western or in the two feminine quadrants, that's when they have their power. And as for the weaknesses of the planets, these conditions indicate weakness and decrease in good fortune when, one, the planets are slow in motion, when they are in their first station, so when they are stationing retrograde, and then when they are retrograde and they are moving retrograde. And the most harmful retrogradation is of the two inferior planets because in addition to being retrograde, they are also burnt. And then being under the rays is also a condition of weakness. Being in the dark degrees of Dhulum. If masculine planets are in feminine signs or in feminine degrees, or if by the day they are under the earth, and if they are by night above the earth. or if feminine planets are in masculine signs, or in degrees by night, or under the Earth, or by day above the Earth. If planets are in their fall, that is a condition of weakness for the planet. If planets are descending in the south, or they are southern, in their ecliptic or in their apogee as well, too. If they are cadent from the cardine, but also if there's a succedent as well, too. Sometimes, like, if they're in the 8th, it's succedent, but it's also averse, so be mindful. If they are in the burnt path, which we've talked about, which is from 19 Libra to 3 degrees of Scorpio, because these are the falls of the luminaries, so this is, where there's difficulty with these matters, and what started and what tries to be birthed there. But also if a planet is in its opposition to its own house as well, too. So literally being in its detriment. And so it's also in its detriment and its exile there, but it's also in its opposition to its domicile. And so it makes a harmful and hostility to its place of home. And if a planet is applying to another planet who is retrograde, who is harmed, who is in its fall, who is cadent, who is retreating without reception, if that planet is going to an unfortunate planet that is in a really bad condition, that's also not good as well. And if it's in its exile, which is understood as its peregrine, or being estranged, which is a planet without any dignity or very minor dignity. So literally, if a planet just has no dignity, like Venus in Leo, Venus in Gemini, there's no types of essential dignities in here. Venus in Sagittarius. The most powerful is if the planet is void, of course, as well, and not aspected by a benefic. We're also told that the 14th condition is if the 3 superior planets are Western, and if they are in the 2 feminine quadrants, it creates weakness here. And weakness of the sun comes from it being in the feminine signs, or the 2 feminine quadrants, which, remember, are from the midheaven to the descendant, and from the IC to the ascendant. And the sun is weak if it's in the feminine signs and these quadrants, unless it's in the 9th place, which is the house of its joy. So if it's in the 9th house, you would not consider that, because it's joyful there. So these are the weaknesses of the planets. But then we also have misfortune of the planets as well, 2 conditions that create misfortune. And so specifically conjunctions with malefics will create misfortune. And remember, this is a little bit different because this is weakness. Quwwa is about having strength, about having power. Like, think of like muscles and power. I don't know, you could think of muscles. You could think of whatever, though. Willpower. Weakness these are conditions of weakness. But these are conditions that bring misfortune to the planets. So that's conjunctions with the malefics, being in an opposition, quartile, trine, sextile, or in between them. And the malefic there is less than the term of that planet in terms of their conjunction or their aspect. So, yeah, any connection with the malefic, really, brings misfortune. But also being in the term of the malefics or being in their houses. So being in Aries, Scorpio, Capricorn, or Aquarius. Or if one of the malefics is rising above them in the 10th or 11th place from it, and the malefic does not receive them. So this is understood as overcoming or domination. And it's when a planet is in the 10th sign from another planet, and typically it's a malefic planet who's doing that. And so that typically is a very bad condition there, where it really like destroys or annihilates some of the matter or the conditions or the situations, with difficulty, with challenges, with whatever the case might be. And if it's a benefic with good fortune, with support, it makes those things very prominent. Because think about the 10th house and what that indicates. It's a place of prominence, of elevation, of authority as well, too. But we also see, yes, that not only the 10th house, but also the 11th house from a place is considered that if a malefic is there and casting a ray to a planet who, it's in the 11th house from that planet, and it doesn't receive it, it's not good. If a planet is conjunct the sun, if it's square the sun, or oppose the sun, this is a condition of misfortune. And if planets are with their own or ascending or descending nodes, or with the head or the tail of the dragon between 12 degrees. So also with the lunar node. And the most harmful of them is the sun, and is between those two when there are 4 degrees before, in front or behind it. And that's why you can actually start to see the effects of eclipses happen 4 days before and 4 days after. Because that's when the corruption of the sun starts to happen, is when it enters 4 degrees of that node, when it comes to it. And the most harmful is when the moon is between the nodes, and one of the two, and there are 12 degrees behind it or in front of it. And then we have one of our other conditions here, which is known as besieging, which happens in two ways. The first way is by conjunction or aspect of a malefic in a sign, and its next aspect is to another malefic planet. So in this case, we can see that Venus is in the sign of Aquarius, and it's going from Mars, or it's going from Mars to Saturn. So it's going from one malefic to another malefic, and so this would represent thwarted actions, difficulty, sabotages, plots, people trying to impede on you, quite literally, especially if they're malefics. Like, besieging can also happen through the benefic planets, but if it's the malefics, it's sabotage, it's plots, it's deceits, all these things, all the above. People interfering, getting in your way, trapping you. But there's also a second way this happens. And it's when a planet has a planet is in a sign, and it has a malefic in the 12th sign from it, and in the second sign from it, besieging the sign, planet, or point by the malefics. So you can see that the moon is technically besieged here. Mars is in the previous sign from it, and Saturn is in the next sign from it. And so if this was the ascendant would also be besieged here too. And another way, condition of misfortune that happens is that in both conditions, if the sun or one of the benefics aspects the besieged planet, and between the planet and those rays are less than 7 degrees, then it indicates release from that misfortune. And if what is besieged in the sign itself and the benefics or the sun aspect, they release that misfortune. And when a planet is besieged by the benefics, then it is the best of good fortune that can happen. So again, besieging doesn't just happen for the malefics. It tends to. We actually just saw one earlier this spring where Mercury was besieged. It went between Mars and Saturn earlier this year. A few weeks ago, I think. So, but if there's a besiegement between the benefic planets, you can say it's the utmost good fortune there. And then we have the corruption of the moon, which happens in 11 specific conditions. And these conditions are very important because these are like considerations you'll always use for like electional, for horary stuff to assess if the moon has been corrupted or not. But also if you're trying to elect, if you're trying to time things, you should not elect for anything under this list here. Well, if you're doing elections, you should avoid these things at all costs in elections. And again, inshallah, if you join me in my election horary course, which inshallah we'll try to teach next year. I don't know. I want to do inshallah. Inshallah, I want to do it at the beginning of next year, but we'll see what fate has in store for me. You'll be using this a lot then though. And so the corruption of the moon is if it is eclipsed. It is the first one here. And the strongest is when it is eclipsed in the sign it was in the base nativity, or it is trine that, or it is square that. So we're also told to look at a natal consideration here as well, too, that eclipse is in the natal sign of the nativity, of the ascendant, especially here. That's notable. If the moon is under the rays of the sun when there's 12 degrees in front or behind, but also if it's in the opposition, if it's 12 degrees or in front behind of the opposition, which we talked about last class was the bond of the moon. And so if the moon is in that bond, if it's in that aspect when it's just approaching 12 degrees in front and just leaving those 12 degrees, when it's in that range, it's corrupted. So the full moon, you shouldn't be doing anything under the full moon. It's a corrupted moon, according to Abu Mashar here. When the moon is with the malefics or it is aspecting it. And when it is in Saturn or Mars's, dodecatomoria. So if it's in the dodecatomoria of Aries, of Scorpio, of Capricorn, of Aquarius, or the sign that Mars and Saturn sit in that nativity or chart or whatever, it's a corruption. With the moon is with the head or the tail, 12 degrees in front or behind it. And when it is south or descending in the south, when it is in the burnt path, as we talked about, and when it is in the term of malefics at the end of the sign. So if it's in those end of the signs where the malefic terms are, yeah, those are going to be where it gets corrupted. And when the moon is slow in motion, so when the moon is approaching its apogee, the moon will be slower. And so that will also, when it moves less than its mean motion, that will also be a condition of corruption. And we're also told that when the moon is in the 9th place from the ascendant, which again, I've never seen this used in practice. Abu Mashar does mention it. that if the moon is in the ninth place from the ascendant, is a corruption. And that's probably because it's the opposite of her joy, which is in the third house. But again, I have never seen that used. But again, experiment, see. Is the moon corrupted when you're in when it's in the ninth house and you're doing an interrogation? Who knows? But then this leads us to what's known as the Fardars. And the Fardars are a type of chronocrator system that are given to us at the end of Book 7 here. And they're used extensively in the Islamic world. I use them extensively with my clients. And the Fardar, the Fadarat, is the Persian word for period here. And so it is a chronocratorship that is derived from the cross-cultural exchange between India and Persia. And it originates in the Hellenistic decennial system and also the Indic Dasha system as well, too. And you can see this through very clearly the influence of the nodes at the end of this period, with the nodes governing 5 years in total together. And each planet governs for an entire period. So the sun will always, in the Fardars, will always govern 10 years. Venus always governs 8. Mercury always governs 13, so on and so forth. And each planet will convey its influence while it's in charge and set the tone of that chapter of a person's life. And so the Fardar becomes the chapter, and then each planet, of the 7 planets, they take over as a helper for 1/7 of that period. So if we have the sun who takes 10 years, we would take 10 years and divide it by 7 planets to get all of the 7 helpers. And so each of those sub-periods would modify the nature of each period and create peaks and valleys for the person in that overall decade of their life. And so this is important to know because these are used extensively, and the Fardars are all determined based on if you're born day or nighttime. They're the same for every person, regardless of your age, regardless of when you're born. Everyone will have the same Fardar, just depending on day or night here for you. The sequence will change here. So if you're born during the day, you'll have 0 to... let's just say 0 to 10. 0 to 10, that is ruled by the sun. You'll have 10 to 18, which is ruled by Venus. So on and so forth. But Fars here in Fardar relates to the light of destiny, or the luminous decree, or the destined light, or the decree generally. And it's understood that the light in the horoscope, the sun or the moon, whichever one is your sect light or your destined light, it is the planet that is in charge of your destiny and the flow of the fortune of your life and of your health, of your eminence, of everything that kind of goes on. And we're also told to examine that triplicity lord as well, too, of the destined light in the revolution frequently. So there's a lot of emphasis on the luminaries with this technique and the diurnal nocturnal nature of this technique as well, too. And likely originates through Al-Andazakhar as well, too. It's understood that the Fardar is the governor of light, or it is the possessor of decrees. And so when we come to them, certain decrees happen in our lives. And then we have the years of the planets, which we've talked about briefly earlier. Excuse me. But the years of the planets, again, we have the Fardar years, which are for Saturn are 11, Jupiter 12, Mars 7, the Sun 10, Venus 8, Mercury 13, the Moon 9, the North Node 3, and the South Node 2. But we also have the lesser years as well, too, which are used actually in the terms. We talked about how, or not the terms, sorry. But those are used, actually they're using quite a lot, length of life stuff. A lot of these things are used for that, but they're also used for zodiacal releasing, the lesser years. The middle and the greater and the lesser years all together are used in nativities. They're used in length of life stuff. They're using a bunch of different techniques. But the mighty years are used primarily in world astrology for like empires and dynasties, because these are like thousands of years and stuff like that. But these are things that you should know. We don't use them too much, but we do occasionally use them, and so they are things that you might need to eventually reference back to in the future. But now we move on to the indications of the 7 planets. We finished the first half of this, which is all the assemblages, which is not too bad. I mean, we're an hour and a half into that, which is not too bad. But yeah, we have the indications of the 7 planets. And so the end of book 7 has chapter 9, which fusses out full delineations. And we're going to be using the translation that Ali Aolomi has done, our beloved teacher here. So we can examine them more closely as well, too, with his updated translation. And Abu Mashar tells us that all of the indications are not found in one person or thing, but sometimes many things come together according to the condition of the planet in itself and its condition in the sphere. So let's start with Saturn. Al-Zuhal. Al-Zuhal. You can see that there's this depiction of Saturn riding on top of an elephant here from from Nujum al-Ulum here, a 17th century Indic Persian text here, in which you can see that a lot of the planets in this text are actually personified as Indic deities here. And so you can see Saturn has multiple arms riding on top of the elephant here, which I think is just beautiful. It's one of my favorite depictions of Saturn, actually. And let's go through it. Abu Mashar tells us that Saturn, its nature is coldness and dryness, a black bile of darkness, very rough and crude, and at times it may be wet and its nature changes. It is heavy and foul and governs all odors, but especially those that are stinking. Its affections are earnest, and it signifies activity of agriculture, farmers, landholders, which are usually aristocracy or small rural land owners, and it signifies buildings, monuments, running waters, wells, measuring and weighing things. So literally like exchange rates and weighing things and exchanging currency and stuff like that. And the measuring of value is all signified by Saturn here. The allotting of land and excessive wealth, labor by hand, greed and envy of others. There's also, greed and envy of others. Unjust poverty. The poor. So all poor people, all marginalized people. Travel and journeys that happen of long distances. Absence from your homeland. So expatriates and sojourners and immigrants. Excessive ego. So having arrogance, but being cunning, holding grudges, having malcontent. Any sort of falsehood, deceit, and betrayal. Also betrayal is a big one for Saturn too. And lies. It represents all sort of old injuries, also chronic illnesses for that reason too. It represents harm and persecution and oppression. It represents alienation and isolation, introversion and enslaving others, imprisonment and captivity, binding, chaining. It's also those who distribute rule, such as kingmakers. It represents defeat, sorrow, injustice, and evil acts. And also wisdom, patience, honesty in speech, methodical in action, contemplative, laconic. They study traditional sciences. These are all some of the virtues of Saturn here, especially, and why they don't actually, in the medieval world, they don't view Saturn as completely terrible, because they have respect for it as you can see here. It means aged and venerable leaders. So old people and traditions and honesty and patience, they have a lot of reverence for that for Saturn. But it also means confusion. It means ill luck and misfortune. So literally like bad fate. But also anxiousness, unformed fears. It represents the dead, genealogy and lineage, a person's ancestors, buried things, eunuchs, as we've seen, orphans, widows. So you see people who are dealing with things related to death or estrangement from family. Old fathers, grandfathers, older siblings. Those who are the corruptible. So those who are corruptible. Those who are violators and assault others. Those who are thieves. Those who are grave robbers and grave diggers. Those who are sorcerers, magicians, astrologers, talisman makers, secret keepers, and the knowledge of secrets, knowledge of hidden things, hermits, asceticism, and in religion, and those who know hidden things, and those who know others' thoughts, but they do not share their own. Very classically Saturn here. They say that Saturn is the greater malefic than Mars, for it is less conducive to life, and this is because Saturn is cold and dry, while Mars is hot and dry, and the heat is related to life in Mars. And Saturn is diurnal and represents masculine nature, but because it is cold and not hot, its masculinity is subject to change. And therefore, it represents eunuchs and those who cannot produce sperm. It also represents the changing of gender, intersex, and non-binary individuals. And we're also told quite literally that it's crucial to understand that Abu Mashar, within the context of medieval medicinal text, which at the time accepted the fluidity of sex and gender, and who accepted that sex could change. Indeed, gender reaffirming surgery is attested in the medieval period, as well as the idea that a person's sex could change over time as a result of diet or even because of climate, which is very important. And we're even given magical operations for actually, literally there's this one operation in Kitab the Risala fil Khawas, sorry, not Kitab, Risala fil Khawas, which is the epistles on the properties, where it literally says in the text that if you put a rabbit's foot and you hang it from someone's neck, that it will cause men to change into women and women to change into men. And so we see that this idea of like sex changes and of fluidity in gender, it's not as rigid as we like to imagine it, as we like to project our rigid understanding of these things in the present day onto the past. These people would have not had that understanding. And so that's also important to understand understand Saturn and Mercury in particular. And then the children of Saturn are blacksmiths, masons, porters, cleaners, tanners, magicians, and workers of the land. All laborers here tend to be ruled by Saturn, the laboring class of people. And these are Al-Biruni's indications. You can pause here to read them. I'm not going to read them out loud because we're going to be here for a while, unfortunately, if we do. But I also want to show you the angel and the jinn of Saturn. So we have the angel of Saturn, which is known as Azrail, which is the angel of death in the Quran. And then we have Maymun, which is the jinn king of Saturn here. As you can see, both of them side by side. So every planet has an angel and a jinn associated with it as well, too, in the Islamic world. Then we have Jupiter al-Mushtari here. You can see that Jupiter is sitting atop of the horse here. And is being celebrated and paraded here. And then Mushtari here, its nature is temperate heat and wetness of air. It indicates the soul, the spirit, living, young children, grandchildren, nephews, and nieces. So we have some family members here. It indicates the wise, judges, experts in law, philosophers, wisdom, discernment, justice, and fairness. I want to focus on that, or actually, let's keep going. Science of dreams and their interpretation. The study of religion, of worship, the study of truth, piety, commanding the good and forbidding the wrong, dedication, faith, best understood as the way religion orders life, and praiseworthiness. There's a lot of great things that I love about this opening one here too, but experts in the law, philosophers, wisdom, hikmah, so ahkam, like the of developing judgments from wisdom, discernments, justice, study of religion. I mean, these are all very important things. Study of law, philosophy, wisdom, religion, faith. Like, these are all very big things associated with religion. Jupiter is the planet of religion. It's the planet of wisdom. It's the planet of knowledge. But it also represents zealousness and moderate hastiness. It signifies triumph, which is a collective triumph and collective victory here rather than just singular individual. This is a collective upliftment. It's abundance. It is righteous victory over wicked ones. And so you see that there's this continuing theme of righteousness with Jupiter. It's praiseworthy things. Jupiter's all praiseworthy acts, all things that earn you praise and all things that earn you, elevation. It's righteous victory over wicked ones, and it's righteous leaders. So it's not oppressive leaders, it's righteous leaders. It's noble kings. It's noble, so people who are elevated through virtue, by virtue and by learning. So through their scholarship, through their study, they are elevated. And it's mighty rulers. It's also joy, so which is more of a spiritual state. It is wealth of a good nature. So this is not just any wealth. It's not wealth, for example, that's acquired through exploitation, through slavery, through, these types of means, through subjugation. It's not that type of wealth. It's wealth of a good nature. It's wealth that multiplies. It is the trappings of wealth, which is like shiny cars, fancy cars, the money. It's the new money. You know what I mean? It's profit or increase. It's the sharing of wealthy, a fortune. It's fortune. it's good character, it's charity. And charity is understood in three ways, which is the giving of alms, the spreading of wealth, and also of endowment. And so a giving of alms is understood as giving to the less fortunate here, and it is voluntary. But the spreading of wealth in the Islamic world is related to the Islamic zakat, which is understood as wealth which is owed to the poor. And so this is mandatory. Like zakat in Islam is not optional. It is a mandatory tax upon Muslims in which they must pay. It is because it is the poor's obligation. Part of what you have in your wealth is obliged to the poor, according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Muslims are said to take that wealth and to take that money. There's a calculation and way you can do it, and to set it aside, to buy meals for the poor, to support the poor, to support people who are in need, widows, orphans, all of that. So the act of that charity and of that generosity is all Jupiter here. Endowments also are Jupiter, which are waqf, which is an institutional wealth, which is given generally to support a cause, like hospitals, schools, orphanages, some sort of charity, or stipend, maybe something like that could also be like now. But Jupiter's all sort of gift giving. It's all generosity. It's all hospitality. So literally being hospitable to people. The love of helping and supporting others. The love of advice. So Jupiter loves to give advice. It is the broadness of mind. So literally liberality in the mind. Not to be confused with liberalism, but liberality. It is blessed friendships and companionship. So it's not just all friendships, but it is all blessed companionships. The word in Arabic that they use for friendship is sadiq. And sadiq means to not only be a friend, but it also means to be truthful. And it also means to be righteous as well, too. Okay, and then it is the bond between ruler and subject. And advancement in social standing, usually through learning or through other sort of means, or through the gaining of honors. It means beautiful architecture, the creating of beauty in the world, of comfortable living, of faithfulness, of keeping one's oaths, which is very important in the medieval world, and just even now. I mean, we live in kind of an oathless society, I would argue. But keeping one's oath, keeping one's agreement, saying that you're going to do what you say you do, but also in marriage, in relationships, in friendships, keeping your oaths, keeping your agreements. These are all Jupiter. Teasing, humor, joyous love, wealthy adornments, the spreading of joy and mirth to the degree it uplifts other people. So instead of spreading negativity, maybe you spread positivity and spreading optimism. It's the love of justice and the hatred of injustice, very explicitly here. And it is instruction, so like learning, and friendship. And we're told that Jupiter is the greater benefic, for it is fortune and generates life. And Jupiter is diurnal, and it represents a masculine nature. And that the children of Jupiter are nobles, viziers, magistrates, judges, courtiers. They are wealthy merchants, imams, candle makers, lamp makers, and inspectors and appraisers. Imams is not just only imams in Islam, but like any sort of religious figure, any sort of religious authority, any sort of priest, any sort of rabbi, they are all signified by Jupiter. And then we have some indications of Jupiter you can pause for. Oh, and then we have the Jinn King of Jupiter. I don't have the angel here. But we have the Jinn King of Jupiter, which is Shamhurish. Shamhurish. And then we have Mars, who is Al-Mirikh. So Al-Mirikh is depicted here riding on top of the sheep. I think it's the lamb here. I like this depiction of Mars. I think actually a lot of the manuscripts here in Nujum al-Ulum are really beautiful. I really do like them. Some really beautiful work that these artists have done. Al-Mirikh. So for Mars, its nature is of great hotness and dryness, of yellow bile, of bitterness, of fire and youthfulness and vigor. And it means heat, burning, infernos and blazes, swiftness and suddenness, strength and power, unexpected things, which typically in the modern world gets assigned to Uranus, but I do push back on that a lot, because a lot of the sudden, unexpected, revolutionary, like indications in language we see people using in modern astrology are just verbatim Mars indications here. Like unexpected things. But also, you notice how Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are all indicate rulers, but Mars indicates rulers who are domineering. Jupiter is righteous rulers, and Saturn is old rulers here. Mars also represents those who are courageous and bold, and rulers who fight, especially those who fight with their soldiers. So this is literally like rulers who double as a general as well too, or like a war leader. And so they literally are on the front lines with their soldiers. They're actually fighting there as well. But it also represents cavalry, the soldiers themselves, war councils, and military leaders. And Mars itself means all conquest, war, fighting, injustice. So notice how Jupiter is justice and Mars is injustice. And Saturn is oppression while Jupiter is liberation. That there is cruelty. It represents harassment. It represents increasing in military rank, especially under Scorpio, which is very much used for increasing in for generals. It represents the seeking of glory and wars of all kinds, the tools and stratagems of war, all the weapons of harming, killing, and warfare, and battle plans. It represents warmongers, those who plan wars, but also those who transgress as well too. Those who start wars, vengeance, the blood price, the separating of things, the cutting of things, those who perform experiments on bodies and with metal tools, those who cut bodies, such as surgeons, but also butchers, and riots and mobs. That's also kind of very important, like the cutting to the body, sharp objects, cutting, separating things. Those are all very important indications you should be picking up on here and themes you should be noticing here. The riots and mobs, looters of tombs, which is different from grave robbers, which are Saturnian. Graves which are under the ground are governed by Saturn, but those above the ground in tombs or mausoleums, which require breaking in forcibly, are ruled by Mars. It also represents highwaymen, raids, violent burglars, and brigands. It represents all war captives and the ransoming of captives and torture of captives. It represents all sorts of beatings, sudden attacks, persecution, violence, fleeing, acting rashly, and impulsiveness, and also carelessness as well. It's harm that is caused from carelessness, either towards the self or harming others. It's all bluntness, coarseness, roughness, ruggedness, stubbornness, self-centeredness, and thinking only of the self, being inconsiderate, being hard-hearted, suddenness or sudden reactions, swiftness in response, decisiveness, speaking and acting hastily, bad words such as literally slander or like foul speech, literally, coarse words, rude words, profanity, and obscenity, speaking unthinkingly and then regretting it later. Sudden expressions and outpourings, such as literally a passion, like a crime of passion. Not like I'm passionate, which we understand. What we really say when we say I'm passionate about something is we're saying I'm enthusiastic about this. But the type of passion that's being referred to with Mars is an uncontrollable fervor and an uncontrollable rage, which is a sudden expression or sudden outburst or sudden outpouring that happens. But it is also immorality, so abandoning your morals. It's hatred. It's faithlessness. Whereas Jupiter is faithfulness, Mars is the lack of faith. It is breaking of oaths, which is very important because while Jupiter is about maintaining our oaths, maintaining our ties, maintaining our connections, it is our social fabric. Mars is about what fundamentally breaks them. And we are in that era where oath breaking is being normalized, not only on a government and a national level, but also on a cultural level as well too, where the culture of infidelity and cheating and stepping out is a lot more normalized. And part of that is part of some world astrology stuff that's going on, but this is related to Mars fundamentally here. It is shamelessness. It is spoiling things, unthinking lies. It spreads corruption. It represents fickleness, sudden change, being about faces, capriciousness, struggles, trials, adultery, and ugly and selfish sex, which For the medieval astrologer, it's very important because for medieval Muslims, sex cannot be masturbatory, as in it cannot be only self-pleasure using someone else's body. So like it must be a type of mutual pleasure that happens between people. So if you are having sex and your partner is not coming, it's bad sex here. Like that's how they would understand bad sex, because good sex is for both people to have orgasms, both people to have pleasure, both people to be satisfied here. And in these manuals, as Ali says in this footnote here, these manuals instructed on how to achieve the female orgasm in heterosexual relationships. Women's pleasure was important, but it's not only important, it was also centered as well, too, in these manuscripts. Like, literally, like, women having an orgasm is not only, like, it's not, like, just like a suggestion. It's, like, a requirement. Like, it's an obligation to sex here. And these manuals cover all sorts of diversity of sexual pleasure, such as same sex, such as non-binary sex, for example, all of this. And so as a result, Mars is not lust, passion, or sex, but it is consumption. It is your pleasure being centered alone, and therefore the sex is bad because you are choosing to consume. You are acting as a consumer, and maybe capitalism is a very Martian system. We act as consumers in a consumerist system. But sex also gets commodified to be something that is consumed on things like dating apps, for example. We treat each other as modes of consumption rather than actual people developing intimacy, developing emotions, developing feelings between each other. And so those types of relationships are all Mars. If it's not mutual, if you're not both coming, if you're not both having post-nut clarity, it's not Mars. It's not Venus. You're in Martian land here. And Mars is all sorts, and again, sex is not necessarily a bad thing here as well, too. Mars governs adultery here, and this is something I was talking about with my boyfriend here, is oh, lust isn't a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. He was questioning. He was oh, isn't lust bad? Because he comes from a Christian upbringing. And in Christianity, you're going to see that sex is a bad thing, and sex is moralized as something that is a sin here. But in Islam, it's not understood the same way. Sex is actually good, and it's often said in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that our spouses, our zawj, our pair, our partner, are we are a garment for them, similarly like they are a garment for us. And that you should sleep with, literally Allah even says in the Quran, we've allowed you to have sex with your partners during Ramadan at nighttime because we saw how much you were deceiving yourselves. You were going crazy, basically, that you couldn't have sex during Ramadan. And so we've allowed you to have sex during the nighttime. And so God doesn't punish people for having sex. God is not anti-sex. God is anti-sex outside of the bounds of social acceptance, which means infidelity, cheating, stepping out, doing things dishonestly, doing things sneakily in this, sabotaging and oath-breaking way. That is the sex that is being described as bad, as ugly, and as selfish. But sex itself is actually a mercy. It is a blessing here in this earth. And so that's something I really want to emphasize with this, because you see a lot of people say passion. You see a lot of people say Mars is sex. Mars is even the sex drive. And I actually really want us to push back on that, because even a lot of Mars being the sex drive has a lot of heteronormative language built into it about Mars being this masculine, penetrative agent, I guess, of sex here, whereas Venus is more this passive, feminine receptacle of this. And I really want us to push back on that a lot, because that isn't how medieval astrologers would have understand it. They would understand all sex, gay, lesbian, non-binary, heterosexual, all Venusian. But the moment that it becomes selfish, the moment it becomes masturbatory, the moment it is done outside of the social contracts and obligations that we have to each other, it becomes Martian. So that's very important here. It also signifies the pains of labor, the kicking of the baby, the movement of the belly, death during pregnancy, death during birth of the child or of the mother, C-sections, abortions, miscarriages, complications at birth and premature births, and circumcisions. We're also told it means younger siblings, middle children, and the chaotic middle child is all signified by Mars. How classic. And all metal crafts, especially of iron. Animal husbandry, particularly sheep and horses. Stables and stable hands. Surgeons, wounds, cuts, and blood are all ruled by Mars. And Mars is the lesser malefic, for it harms and damages life, but it can also spur action. Again, through its heat, but its hot and dryness does cause it to be malefic. And it is nocturnal, and it's masculine in nature. And the children of Mars are said to be executioners, butchers and surgeons, cooks, large animal tamers, leaders in battle, cavalry, ironworkers, and soldiers. Kind of intense sphere, right? Not for the weak, quite literally. This is for the bold, for the strong and the powerful, this sphere. So, let's move away from Mars' sphere, because I'm done with Mars' sphere. I'm done with Mars' disruptions. But here's some of the indications as well, too. You can guys pause for these when you watch the video back. There's also slides that are there, too, so you guys can always look at the slides. And this is Al-Ahmar, who is the Jinn King of Mars, who is red, holding a decapitated head as well, too, and riding on top of the lion, as you can see here. And then we have Ash-Shams here, who is the sun. I love this depiction of the sun. I actually think it's such a very beautiful depiction of Leo, of the sun in Nujum al-Ulum. Yeah, one of my favorite ones, actually, of the sun. I mean, again, I think this manuscript has so many great depictions of the planets. Like, amazing. As for the sun is of the nature of hotness and dryness, which is gradual. So it's gradual heat and gradual dryness. So it's not intense or strong like Mars, but gradual. It represents the ego and the soul, life enduring, light shining, intellect which animates life, and signifies rulers, kings, renowned leaders, and those with a commanding presence. The council of rulers, those who are praiseworthy and commendable, those who are renowned and famous. And typically the connotation here is that they are famous for something good, for doing praiseworthy actions. It's wealth that shines. It's the desire for recognition. It's pride. It's those who are boastful. It is the point of origin and clarity. It represents gold and the desire for it, the adornments of gold, clean clothes, cleanliness, and also the feeling of being clean. It represents attractiveness and charisma, so it's a magnetism, and someone who seeks to lead. In the sun, as we've established before, it damages and harms what draws too near, either conjoining or through drawing it together. For those who draw too close are burned and forgotten by being overshadowed and made invisible. To be near is to be afflicted, while distance reaps the benefits. It blinds and it grants sight. It creates and it destroys. It grants life and it harms life. It is blessed and it is harmful. It is beneficial and it is destructive. It is fortunate and it is unfortunate. Notice how I'm emphasizing "and" here, because it possesses both of these natures. It ennobles and it demotes. It elevates and raises up, and it casts down, and it abases, and it degrades. And it is conducive for life, but in excess it is dangerous. It is the source and the return, which is understood in Islam as inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It is the life which endures and which remains. And it also governs the deen of the person, which is understood as the practice of a person's religion, the way a person orders their life through the practice of their religion and the practice of their beliefs. And is the matter of religious practice. In family, it is the mark of brothers. It represents abjuring and renouncing evil. So remember, the sun is not just authority and leadership, but it's also renouncing the evil. It's also praiseworthy actions. It's also good things. The sun is partially a fortune here, too. And it represents the morning and the dawn. So the bright and the gradual heat that comes with the morning and the dawn. Think of that. It represents socializing and mingling. It represents the granting of prayers and petitions and of order. And it signifies the origin. And the sun is of the day, and it is masculine in nature. And the children of the sun are the sultans, rulers, goldsmiths, shield makers, physicians, and magistrates. And here these magistrates are different than Jupiter's judges, whereas these have more autonomy as they're solar here. And then we have some of the indications of the planets from Al-Biruni to pause on. And the Jinn king of the sun is Al-Mudhib. You can see here eating the snake with a little bit of halo. One of the Jinn known for alchemy in particular. And we have Al-Zuhara, which is Venus. And you can see her face is a little bit cut off here, but that's one of my favorite depictions. She's being pulled by turtles. How amazing. So elegant, so beautiful. In Al-Zuhara, the nature of Venus is coldness and wetness and is temperate. So Venus, Abu Mashar has a little contradiction here where she says that she's cold, but Venus also is referred to as hot. And so her nature changes based on her proximity to the luminaries, it seems like. And it is phlegmatic and benefic, and it indicates women, mothers, and sisters, so family members here. Also clothing, adornments of gold, silver, and jewels, so all jewelry, cleanliness, luxury, and socialness, and kindness. Fraternity, hubris, and having a superior attitude. Yes, this is ruled by Venus, thinking you're better than others. Delight, joy, singing, dancing, music of string and of wind, composing melodies, scents, pleasant odors, board games, chess, backgammon while reclining, which typically these were social events played in groups or in public in the gardens. And so you could do this as social events in the park, social events in the gardens, playing games in public parks, things like that. Marriages, weddings, ecstasy, giddiness, delight in men, women, and youths. It represents jokes, teasing, and adulterers. So again, it's interesting because while those who commit adultery are Mars, the adulterers are still Venus because they're having sex, ultimately. Also singers. It represents sweetness, sugar, honey, wine, sharbat, which is a type of frozen sweet drink usually made with like mango, flour, basil, herbs, many different things. It indicates lovemaking, sex among men and women, pleasure and love of all variety, sex and from behind, and sex by rubbing. So sex from behind particularly is a reference to anal sex. So this is for gay sex, or also for other people having anal sex. But it also, sex by rubbing is specifically a reference to lesbian sex here. And so the love, it represents, Venus is the love of people. It is the love of one's children. It is affection and towards others, kindness towards others, peacemaking, harmony, friendship, beauty, hospitality, passion, good desires, luxury. Luxury is in here twice. Honeyed words, flattery, compliments, teasing and flirting, appreciation of the body, sensuality, the instinctual soul or the natural soul, desire, beautiful appearances, beautiful clothes, art, beautiful works such as like gardens, fountains, or just any artistry, any beautiful like sculpting arts, things like that. Decorating of living rooms, so like interior design is Venus. Adornment of flowers, gems, jeweled crowns, necklaces, dyed clothes, dyes, dyers, silk making, shopping and enjoying shopping. So retail therapy is Venus. Spice shops. I've been in spice shops. Unfortunately, I'm a sucker for spice shops, perfume shops, and just shopping, period. I just love, don't get me started. Devotion and worship. And all sorts of devotion for Venus are ecstatic, all-consuming devotion in this case here. And Venus is said to be the lesser benefic and beneficial and fortunate to life, and it is nocturnal and feminine nature. And the children of Venus are said to be musicians, dancers, queens, nobles, silk makers, and courtesans. And then we have some of the indications of Venus here. Again, more indications. Again, you see that we can really keep going on and on and on about these planets. And then we're told that Zaubah, is the jinn king of Venus, and the angel of Venus is Anail. We have Zawbah and Anail. And then we have Mercury, Atarid. From Nujum al-Ulum. Here I love this depiction of Mercury too, sitting, reading the book as a scribe. And in Nujum, and in Kitab al-Madkhal, Abu Mashar says, Mercury is of changing nature, aligning and mixing with the planets and signs it is found in, and adapts accordingly. Its nature is moderate in shifting dryness and coldness. And it signifies younger people, youths, younger siblings, servants, and the love of servants, and attention towards servants. So, and this here, Ali says that Mercury and its sign Gemini usually indicates mingling with people from a different class. And so in the modern world, this might be to the working class in this case. So it represents, Mercury is both noble scholars, but it's also the working class alike too. So like your Starbucks barista, for example, is Mercury. You know, the person who you're seeing in the drive-thru consistently is Mercury, for example. Like, these are people who are a part of the working class, people who you see at the grocery store. These are your mercurial people as well, too. And it signifies rational intellect, faculty with words, convincing speech, eloquence, news, reports, hadiths, which are the sayings of in Islam is the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In Islam, Muslims will derive their understanding of the Quran or the understanding of Islam of their religion from two sources, from the Quran and from the hadiths, which are the sayings of the Prophet. So any sort of hadiths, I mean, it doesn't have to be just religious hadiths here, but any sort of hadith as well too. Like there's hadiths of Isa alayhi salam, Isa ibn Maryam, who is Jesus. Or hadiths of Idris alayhi salam, who is known as Enoch. But also the science of hadith as well too, which is the science of religion, and it is the process by which the Sharia when people talk about the evil Sharia law, stupid racist, but yes, Sharia law here is derived from the science of religion, the science of hadith here. This is the saying of the Muhammad and the verses of the Quran. And Mercury is these nitty-gritty details of transmission of knowledge, of information. And from this information of the sayings of the Prophet and the Quran, that we then see like the actual laws and customs of Islam that are then established as the Sharia. But Sharia can refer to anyone. Anyone can have their own Sharia, which is their own customs and beliefs and things that inform their worldview. But there's also divination and prognostication and omens, so augury. It's knowledge, teaching, and learning. It's scholars, discussion, debate. It's the discourse of scholars. It is appreciation of culture, but specifically manners, adab. So having refined manners of hospitality, appreciation of poetry, being kind towards strangers, being kind towards travelers, things like that. Appreciation of difference, measurement, counting, calculation, so all mathematical stuff, philosophy, wisdom and the love of learning and love of wisdom, occult sciences, occult books, so all the occult learning, which includes magic, medicine, astrology, and alchemy, is the occult sciences in the Islamic world. Oral explanation, writing, excellence in science and renowned in learning, and intellectual competition and cooperation. It also signifies the mukhanathun and the khuntha, which we've talked about before, the intersex, non-binary, and transgender people of the Islamic world, but also bisexuals. Your local chaotic bisexual is ruled by Mercury. Its means of money exchange, taxes, ledgers, bookkeeping, accounting, rhetoric, writing, the tricks of speech, poetry, but also slander, deception, tricky words, forgers and their papers, spending possessions in learning and knowledge of hidden and occult things. It's also important too, like spending your money to learn and study things. But also astrology, very explicitly. It also means the market, so like the stock market, but also buying and selling, exchanges, business partners, contracts, written thieving, stealing, cunningness, shady business deals and bad contracts, quick activities, fickleness, along with Mars, diplomacy, patience, speech that pacifies, but speech that riles up. So speech that can cause people to be calmed and to be soothed, but also speech that can cause people to be agitated and to be irritated. It's lawyers who enjoy arguing. It's nervousness. It's excellence in religion. It's elegant manners. It's protectors and advocates. It's the guardian of siblings and of neighbors. It represents skills with hands, crafts and craftspeople, perfectionism, desire for improvement, barbers, cupping, skill in hunting, small animals, and canal and small rivers. And Mercury's nature is changing, being beneficial with the benefics and harmful with the malefics, which we've talked about. And Mercury is of the day when rising and of the night when setting, which we've talked about. If Mercury is east of the sun, then Mercury is a morning star. And if Mercury is west of the sun, it's a evening star. And the children of Mercury are said to be carpenters, scribes, craftspeople, messengers, those who work in apothecaries, merchants, bankers, and tax collectors, all signified by Mercury here. I like the sphere of Mercury. Somewhat fickle, but this is Mercury. I love the connections of Mercury to learning and education and study, though. I think it's some of the overt ones we really see a lot here, like those nitty-gritty details of that, but I think they're really, I think it's really great. Some more indications. And then we have the angel of Mercury, who is known as Mikhail, and Barkan is the jinn king of Mercury, who is the black jinn that you see right here. So Mikhail and Barkan. And then we have our final planet today. And we're going to wrap things up. We're at the end of this. Again, kind of over 2 hours. Actually, we're 2.5 is not too bad today. We almost did 3 in the last class, so we're doing pretty good on time right now. Alhamdulillah. So we have Al-Qamar, the moon. I love this. The moon with the rabbit here as well, too. I think it's so cool. Let's look at Al-Qamar. The nature of the moon is the light of the night, and it is the nature of coldness and wetness. And we've talked about how its elemental balance will change throughout the month. So it'll start off hot and wet, hot and dry, cold and dry, cold and wet. It is phlegmatic, and it is occasional heat from the sun because it is luminescence and lightness of weight. And it seeks out light, joy, beauty, serenity, and praise, and is the beginning of all human and animal activity. And it represents the relationship between rulers and their people, and the rulers and their nobles and their people. It represents virtuousness, the fortune that comes in livelihood and in wealth, the watching of omens and a sense of things that are to come. Revelation, the working of miracles, illusions, the measurement of water, land, keeping measurements, but also emotions, undistinguished feelings, and noble women. There's some that are also very important. Like revelation is very important for the moon. The moon as the planet of revelation, and how revelation comes through dreams or flashes of inspiration. That's also very important with the moon here. And also how revelation comes through the angel Jibreel in Islam is also very much connected to the moon. But working of miracles, as in with the prophets, but also illusions that are worked, as in sometimes, what we can see, the working of miracles and illusions, as you might see in the story of Musa, alayhi salam, where he has a magic battle, basically, with the people of Pharaoh, and they use illusions, whereas Musa is working miracles. There's also the measurement of water and land, keeping measurements. Yes, we talked about that. But also noble women, women with children, pregnant women, foster mothers. So not just, foster mothers are also mothers too. So they're also under the moon. And also mothers just period. But also wet nurses and all women from the mother's side of the family. It's all rumors, all messages, all delegates, and all appointees. And it also represents those who flee and are escaping persecution. Like, so families who escape persecution, who have to emigrate, who have to flee because of war, these are all represented by the moon too. And fugitives and forgetfulness. And it signifies a people amongst the people, and it signifies reception among the people, and it takes on the quality of those it is with. It is a king with kings, and it is a slave with slaves. So the moon will be high and lofty with the kings, but the moon can also be low as well too, with the working class and the slaves. It represents popularity and acceptance by the masses. So they are accepted generally by everyone. And indicates changing health and illness, sickness of the body, and the inability to keep secrets, and abundance of food and of sustenance. It is the giver of forms, and it ensouls the body. The moon is nocturnal, as we've talked about, and the children of the moon are all fishers, sailors, camel riders, matrons, and nobles. These are some of the major indications of the moon. I really do love them. Some of my favorite indications of the moon are the watching of omens, things related to revelation. I think those are some really important ones. But also the way that the moon signifies reception amongst the people. Like, the moon is a king with the king, a slave with slaves. Again, remember, if you go back to what we talked about, I think it was in Unit 4, the moon, her nature changes whenever she's connecting with something. So she takes on the nature of whoever she's with, and similarly, the moon will do that. And as you see, you'll see that in chart examples eventually, and when we go through them, inshallah. Some more indications of the moon here. Nitty-gritty things. And then the angels and the jinn. So we have Jibrail as the angel of the moon, and Abyad, who is the jinn of the moon. The jinn king of the moon from the period, from the Book of Felicity here. And so, yeah, that is officially our class today. Those are our slides. So I know we've actually gone through so much today. This is again, probably one of our very long classes as well too, because again, this unit is so much to cover. I think this unit has probably been like maybe 4.5 hours in total. So, we have a lot to cover today, so digest it. I would really recommend digesting on these indications of the planets, but also review some of those assemblages again. Because again, one of the things I emphasize, especially about this class, I said at the beginning of this class, but also these specific classes that we're doing over last week, this week, next week, these are all really the basis of any sort of delineation that you're going to be doing. Any sort of complex delineation, we're starting to layer on many different things together now. We're putting in the house with the planetary phase, with the dignity together. And now we're putting the aspect relationship to really create these complex conditions of how planets will interact with each other. And so review these things today, refresh on them, brush up on them, and even reflect on, like I said, reflect on those conditions or those indications of the planets, because, even as I prepared this class for you guys, I'm like, wow, like, yeah, like, interesting. Like, I was thinking about, for this class, it was the moon. I was like, yeah, the moon is even those who adopt children as well too. The moon is all sorts of family, and it shows that family doesn't just extend to those who are by blood, but those who are chosen as well too. And that's one of the things I loved about the moon. But you get those reflections as the more you just kind of sit with it. And even while I was reading the Arabic as well too, the Arabic is really beautiful as well too. So if you do have the chance to read the Arabic, I encourage you to go into the PDF and to read the Arabic of those indications, because there's just things that can't get transferred over. Like for Saturn, for example, when it says darkness, the word for darkness, dhulum, is connected to the word for injustice. And so there's this concept of like people's faces on the Day of Judgment in Islam will be dark, will be cast with dhulum, because of the injustice they committed when they were on Earth. So there's certain concepts like that, just like linguistically, that don't always get transferred over. So if you do have if you are able to read Arabic and you can, I would recommend you do that. But yeah, I don't know. There's no knowledge check for this today. But what we're going to be doing moving forward now is next class, we're going to be going over the lots. And so everything that we've talked about planetary conditions, planetary connections, planetary significations, house significations, sign significations, we're going to now add it all together by putting in the lots. And the lots will act as a determinative factor for us to really start making judgments based on these conditions of what we see, based on the signifiers that we see. So again, everything we use in this class is going to be used for judgments, for interpretation. We're slowly starting to build these things even more and build them in more complex ways. And inshallah, next week we're going to be doing a lot more in the lots and really kind of going in and starting to do some more judgments. So we'll see. Any questions? Any questions, comments, concerns, anxieties? Anyone? And again, no pressure if you don't have any. Alrighty. I think we're good. I don't see any questions or comments or anything. Well, thank you all for coming here today. Yes, I will upload this video so everyone can listen back to it. And it's been great to talk to you guys all about this unit today. I really love looking at these indications of the planets. So thank you for coming, everyone. I hope you all have a great week. And as always, I will see you next week and we will reconvene again for another lovely session about astrology. So thank you all. Take care, everyone. Bye.